September 9, 1944. Just after 7:45 in the morning, a pale mist rolled over the fields of Lorraine, France. Hill 265. Sat quietly outside the small village of Arracourt, wrapped in fog so thick it softened the outlines of every tree and hedgerow. But behind that silence, death waited. 12 German Panther tanks from the 113th Panzer Brigade moved into position, their engines rumbling beneath the haze. Their orders were simple: ambush the Americans, crush them, and restore German pride. The men inside those Panthers believed victory was certain. Down below, 5 Sherman tanks from Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams's 37th Tank Battalion rumbled across open ground. Their crews had no idea what was hiding ahead. On paper, the Germans held every advantage. The Panther's long-barreled 75mm gun could destroy a Sherman from over a mile away. Its armor was thick, sloped, and seemingly invincible. The Sherman, by comparison, was smaller, lighter, and far less powerful. Any military analyst of the time would have predicted a massacre. But war doesn't always follow logic. When the first shot rang out, the ground shook. A Panther fired from the ridge, its shell slicing through the morning fog. The Americans reacted instantly. Instead of freezing or retreating, the Sherman crews fired into the ground ahead of them, kicking up a massive wall of dust and smoke. Hidden inside that artificial fog, they moved fast. Abrams's men knew their tanks couldn't win a head-on duel, so they turned the fight into chaos. At the same time, American forward observers radioed coordinates to artillery units waiting miles behind. Within minutes, shells screamed through the air and exploded across the hillside. White phosphorus rounds blinded German gunners. High explosives tore through the ground, shattering optics, snapping tracks, and throwing the ambush into confusion. When the smoke lifted, the Panthers realized something terrifying. The Shermans weren't where they expected. They had flanked around. Within hours, the battlefield became a scene of burning wrecks. By noon, 8 of the 12 Panthers lay destroyed, while Abrams's Shermans kept moving forward, untouched. What happened that morning shattered one of the biggest myths of World War II, that German engineering brilliance alone could guarantee victory. Hitler himself had demanded the counteroffensive in Lorraine. Furious at the American breakout from Normandy, he ordered the newly formed Panzer Brigades to strike back, crush General Patton's spearheads, and push the Allies out of France. On paper, the German force looked terrifying. 90 Panther tanks, 90 Panzer IVs, and thousands of infantry. But reality told another story. Fuel shortages crippled their mobility. Replacement crews were rushed into service with minimal training. The Panthers, while deadly, were mechanically fragile. Their transmissions cracked, their suspension systems clogged in mud, and their complex engines broke down constantly. They were powerful, but unreliable. The Americans, on the other hand, didn't rely on any single weapon. Their entire doctrine revolved around teamwork. Tanks, infantry, artillery, air power, all working as one machine. It wasn't about having the best gun or the thickest armor. It was about coordination, flexibility, and the ability to strike at the right moment. Creighton Abrams understood that perfectly. A former cavalry officer, he drilled his men to move fast, shoot fast, and communicate constantly. Every Sherman tank had a radio. That single detail gave the Americans a massive edge. Information flowed instantly. When one crew spotted an enemy tank, every other Sherman knew its position within seconds. The Germans, meanwhile, were often blind. Many of their tanks lacked radios altogether. As the battle raged, American artillery proved unstoppable. Shells rained down on German columns before they even reached the front line. When the weather cleared, American aircraft joined in. PERT-47 Thunderbolts swooped low, their rockets and bombs ripping through the countryside. Panthers that managed to escape the artillery barrage were hit from the sky. Others fell victim to American tank destroyers like the nimble M18 Hellcat, which could sprint across fields, fire from behind, and vanish before the enemy could react. The result was devastating. In just 10 days, the U.S. 4th Armored Division destroyed or disabled more than 200 German armored vehicles, while losing only 48 of their own. The kill ratio was staggering. Nearly 4-1 in America's favor. But numbers alone didn't tell the whole story. Arracourt proved that the U.S. Army system of warfare, its logistics, communication, and adaptability, had surpassed even the feared German war machine. For the Germans, the defeat was crushing. Senior commanders like von Seckendorf and von Braunert were killed within days. Without leadership, coordination collapsed. The Panzer brigades, once symbols of Hitler's armored might, fell into disarray. Many tanks were abandoned, not because they were hit, but because they simply ran out of fuel or broke down. The mighty 113th Panzer Brigade ceased to exist. The Americans lost tanks too, but here again their system showed its strength. Most damaged Shermans were quickly repaired. U.S. maintenance crews could replace an entire engine in just a few hours. The Sherman wasn't invincible, but it was dependable. It kept running, kept fighting, and could be fixed almost anywhere. German crews, by contrast, often had to destroy their own tanks. When they broke down, simply because they couldn't move them, Arracourt became a turning point. It was more than a battle. It was a lesson in modern warfare. The Germans had relied on superior machines. The Americans relied on superior organization. The Panther tank, despite its fearsome gun and thick armor, was just one piece of metal. The Sherman, though smaller and weaker, was part of a living system, a web of intelligence, supply, and support that turned every engagement into a coordinated strike. For the men inside those tanks, it was still hell. Sherman crews knew that if their tank was hit, it could burst into flames in seconds. German shells could punch through their armor with ease. The smell of burning gasoline, the screams of trapped crewmen, and the chaos of exploding ammunition haunted survivors. For years, war wasn't glorious. It was terror mixed with duty. Civilians in Lorraine suffered too. Artillery shook the villages, roofs collapsed, and entire families fled their homes. The landscape that had once been quiet, farmland, became a graveyard of steel. Fields were littered with wrecked tanks, torn uniforms, and the twisted remains of war, And yet, out of that destruction came a realization that changed military history. The Americans had proven that victory in the modern age didn't belong to the dot-ret side with the most powerful machines. It belonged to the side that could adapt, coordinate, and sustain the fight. Arracourt showed that technology, no matter how advanced, meant nothing without strategy and logistics behind it. By the end of September, the German counterattack was over. Of the 260 armored vehicles they sent into battle, barely 60 were still operational. The U.S. Army, though bloodied, remained unstoppable. Within 8 months, Nazi Germany would surrender. Creighton Abrams went on to become one of America's most respected generals. His leadership at Arracourt embodied the future of warfare: speed, communication, and teamwork over brute strength. Even decades later, military academies around the world study the battle as an example of how flexibility can overcome firepower. When people talk about the legendary tanks of World War II, they often focus on machines: the Tiger, the Panther, the Sherman. But Arracourt wasn't really a story about machines. It was a story about people, about the American soldiers who refused to give up, who used every tool at their disposal to outthink and outmaneuver a stronger enemy. It was about mechanics who worked through the night repairing tanks, artillery crews who never stopped firing, and radio operators who kept the network alive under fire. Arracourt proved something timeless. Wars are not won by weapons alone. They're won by systems, by cooperation, by the will to adapt when everything seems lost. On that misty morning, in September 1944, the Americans didn't just win a battle. They changed the way wars would be fought forever. So if you've stayed with me through this story, you've seen how 5 underpowered Shermans turned the tide against a force that should have crushed them. It's a reminder that ingenuity, teamwork, and courage can outmatch even the most advanced machines. And if you found this story as powerful as I did, make sure to drop a comment below and tell me what moment surprised you most. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because more untold stories of courage and strategy are coming soon. And as always, thank you for watching till the very end.